We're live. Evening, folks. Thanks for coming in. Hope you're all well. Welcome to show 3 of our 4 in a row. So tonight we have this little lady back with us yet again, Tracey. Always a pleasure. We were panicking there because she's having some issues, and I don't mean health-wise. I mean internet-wise.
We had a few gremlins in the system, didn't we?
I was some gremlins kicking about the system, and I can feel a sneeze coming on. So if I sneeze in, my sneezes take about 10 minutes to build up. I don't know about yours. You know how you can feel it coming, and then you eventually sneeze. It's like waiting in a train. You know what I mean?
I'll say bless her just in case.
That was a bit of useless information. So tonight, the last time we had Tracey on, we were talking about Henry VIII, the man himself. So tonight's show is going to be about his first 2 wives. We're going to be doing other shows that will feature his other 4, and then people in the background basically. But tonight we are going to be talking about Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Am I right here?
We are indeed.
I will say that we might not be 100% accurate. We do sort of say things to the best of your knowledge. Some of it might be a lot of poppycock, you know. But we shall get there. But I've not been swatting Katherine of Aragon, to be honest with you, which I should hang myself head in shame. But I'm not going to. But I know Tracey has. She's been doing her homework. I hope.
I know a little bit about her.
So Katherine of Aragon was Henry VIII's first wife, but prior to that, she was married to Henry's older brother, Arthur, who tragically passed away around about the age of 15, I think.
Right, yeah.
So she was actually Henry VIII's sister-in-law, and then she became a widow, basically. And she was born 1485, I want to say.
She was on the 16th of December, yeah.
She was of Spanish descent.
She was, indeed.
This was one of the reasons that Arthur married her, to strengthen England's ties with the Spanish, because, as we said in the last show, at that time, relations with the French were quite unstable. So Henry VII, Henry and Arthur's father, got the idea that if they married somebody Spanish, I forgot what I was saying there. It would form quite a powerful allegiance. So it was more political than anything.
As a lot of those marriages were back then, weren't they?
Yeah. So I'll let Tracey take over for here.
Yeah. So Katherine of Aragon. She is, I know we always talk about Anne Boleyn, don't we? But Katherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, was actually an amazing lady and an amazing strength to Henry VIII. So, as we've just said, she was born on the 16th of December, 1485. Her parents were King Ferdinand II of Aragon, her father, and her mother was Queen Isabella I of Castile. And as you say, this marriage to Arthur happened way before it should have done. She was basically betrothed at the age of 3, which is quite shocking, isn't it? It was decided at the age of 3 that she would come to England and she would marry, and again, like you say, to solidify the relationship between Spain and England. So she had 2 other siblings. They had quite a privileged upbringing, quite a privileged childhood. It was very much about power and politics and religion. And they were a very devout Catholic family, as we know. She had 2 siblings. Both of them were older. One of them was called Juan, and he died at the age of 19. And this must have had a huge impact on Katherine, because it was an older brother, an older sibling that she looked up to. She also had an older sister called Joanna, and she had mental health issues. So those siblings that should have been her strength and her support network to start with weren't there. You know, she lost her brother, her sister had mental health issues. So it was a really difficult time for Katherine, for Katherine. And as I say, she came to England. She was betrothed at the age of 3, but she actually came to England at the age of 10 to actually meet with Arthur and for the families to meet. However, she didn't speak English. So when they first met, they actually spoke in Latin, because this is a language that they both understood and they both knew. So she started to learn a lot of politics and a lot of things, you know, sort of the English way, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you mentioned, they were then married at the age of 15. They were both 15. And it was a very short marriage because, sadly, Arthur, who was Henry VIII's older brother, as we know, he died 5 months into their marriage. So she was left a widow at a very, very young age. So this was a very kind of sad beginning. The families weren't sure what to do because there was quite a gap between her becoming a widow and her marrying Henry VIII. She was actually 5 years older than Henry VIII. So when they did marry in 1509, she was 23. So she was quite a wise, knowledgeable woman by that time, because, as I said, she'd been in England for a long time. She was learning the language, she was learning the way, she was learning the politics. So it was quite an interesting time for them actually to get married. And as you know, they got married in 1509 before Henry VIII then went through the coronation. So she was then crowned queen.
You see, she would have been quite educated by then, and I think Henry would have had a lot of catching up to do. Because let's face it, you know, offers Arthur was trained or schooled in how to be a king. Then all of a sudden, you know, he passes away. Henry's thrown into the limelight, and he needs to start from square one. So I would imagine he would have had quite a bit of catching up to do, and plus with him being younger.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well.
And interestingly, because she was of Spanish origin, you would think that she would have the dark looks, the dark complexion. But apparently she was described as being a very fair complexion. She had auburn hair. Some people believe that she had blue eyes. So it doesn't sound like you would imagine a Spanish lady to look, does it? She was quite a fair complexion. And I think many of the portraits that were painted of that era were always painted after the lifetime of somebody. So they weren't painted whilst they were still here. But one of them was painted, one portrait was painted in 1502, which depicted this very fair, very, you know, not a Spanish looking lady at all. But there was also a portrait painted many years later who people thought was Jane Seymour, until it was investigated. This was still quite a long time ago, of course, but until it was investigated and they realised that it was actually Katherine of Aragon. Because any films or documentaries that she's been in, she's always been portrayed as the dark hair, the dark skin.
That's right.
Yeah, but she didn't look like that at all. She was actually quite a fair person, as in looks. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, how we think of her and how we perceive her, but how she actually was.
It's the same as, you know, there's Laura saying, "Evening, Tracey, lovely
Hello.
to see you again."
Oh, nice to see you as well, Laura.
Hello again, Scott. Sorry, earlier day. Tell you. So she was yapping to the wife. That's Tommy Sarah. So two of them have been yapping away when Laura should have been on here at 9 o'clock. But, you know, we'll let that one slide.
Well, we nearly weren't on here at 9 o'clock, were we?
That was your fault, but not mine. I was here at 10 to 9.
Having a bit of a panic because we were having. I
was early. We get off. We were saying about the paintings and stuff. We know that there was quite a lot of paintings done of Henry, during his lifetime. By Holbein.
Yeah.
Holbein. I don't know how you pronounce this guy's name. Holbein. And sometimes you wonder how accurate the portraits really were.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it? And whenever we see portraits of Henry, it's always in his older years, isn't it? When he was really big and quite unattractive in some ways. There aren't many portraits of him when he was younger, are there? When he was young and athletic, as we said before. But Katherine isn't how we would imagine her to be. It's really quite interesting. She was deeply religious. She was incredibly a loyal person to not only her family, but to Henry as well. And then she had a very commanding presence. Apparently she was very attractive. She was of average height, but she just had this commanding presence that people sort of sat up and took notice of her. So she, you know, and I think she had that kind of commanding presence on Henry as well. Again, as we say, because she was that little bit older, that little bit wiser. She was very sort of well informed with politics, as I say. So she could even advise Henry, and she could advise people in his court. They really took notice of what she had to say. So she was a really interesting lady, a really, really interesting character. And Henry and Catherine had, you know, they had such a strong marriage. They had a really strong, powerful marriage, and the public and their subjects absolutely loved them. They were together for many, many years, 24 in fact. And it was after the sort of 20th year when things started to go a little bit pear-shaped, as we know, when Anne Boleyn came along, which we'll talk about shortly. But obviously, the struggle with their marriage was that Catherine had many miscarriages, unfortunately. She had one stillborn boy. You know, Henry was desperate to have a son, to have an heir, and she was desperate to provide this for him. But as we know, back in that day, there were many deaths, weren't there, in infancy? A lot of the babies died, didn't even make it, obviously having the miscarriages. And then in 1516, she gave birth to the very famous Mary I, who became Bloody Mary. So she did produce a very strong future queen. But at the time, that was a great disappointment to Henry, as we know, because he was so desperate to have a son. The great achievements, I would say, in her lifetime, so we're skipping forwards a little bit here, but in 1513, she was given the role of regent of England. When Henry went off to campaign in France, she was left to sort of hold the fort. And again, because she had this commanding presence, she had this knowledge of politics, people would really take notice of her. And she played a big part, as you will know, in the defence against the Scots in the Battle of Flodden, when King James IV was killed. And she was said to have sent a blooded piece of his clothing to Henry to prove that he had actually died. So it's really, really interesting. And also, she was also said to ride on horseback north to one of these battles. And she had a suit of armour especially made for her because she was pregnant at the time. So quite a strong, amazing lady when you think what she achieved.
I was just going to say that it shows you how strong a character she was. You know, she's pregnant, she's sticking on her suit of armour and riding on horseback to go and face, you know, to take part in a battle.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely amazing lady. She really achieved a lot. And as I said, very skilled in politics. She used to advise a lot of the council. She was also a patron in learning and arts. She was obviously very well accomplished as well, because she came from quite a privileged background. You know, they went to all of these wonderful pageants and things when they were quite young. So she became a real well-rounded lady. And it was, as I say, a great strength, a great support to Henry. So,
do you think their marriage, you know, they were together for 20 plus years and they had a really strong marriage, do you think part of that was because of, you know, Henry and his father would have known what was at stake? You know, it may have been drummed into Henry VIII, you know, you need to keep this marriage going. You need to keep this marriage alive, basically, because we don't want to fall out with Spain.
Yeah, and I think they realised the importance of the marriage, but I also think it was genuinely a very strong match. It was a very strong marriage. They were both very young. They were both very attractive. They were both very attracted to each other. They really supported each other. So I think, despite the weight on their shoulders of the marriage, you know, needing to succeed, I think genuinely it was a very strong marriage. It really was. And when it all went wrong, when you know, we'll talk about Anne Boleyn, as we said, but when it all went wrong, when she was kind of on the scene, I think it was very, very difficult for Katherine. She couldn't believe that this beautiful husband, who she'd had such a strong, loving relationship with, a loving marriage with, could have let her down so badly. You know, it's really sad to think that, isn't it? That they had this lovely, strong bond, and she was, you know, always loyal to him, even when he passed to one side. She remained loyal. She always signed herself the Queen, even when she was sort of banished a little bit later on. So it's a great tragic love story in a way, isn't it, when you think about it?
It is tragic, and as you say, you know, imagine how she would have felt, you know, when her husband of 20 years, whatever, you know, cast his eye on somebody else. But I think in Henry's mind as well, and by that time, if I'm right, was roughly running about the 40s mark. And so that was considered back then to be beyond childbearing age.
Yeah.
You know, so I think what was going through Henry's mind at the time as well was that, you know, she's 40, say, for example, she can't have any more kids, so I'm buggered for a male heir, so I need to find one somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because I know, I mean, it was a big thing for a lot of families, but for Henry, it was massive. You know, that he had a male heir to carry on the throne. And it was also massive for him because, how can you put it, it was like a blow to his masculinity, you know, which just could not be seen as a, you know, it could have been seen as a sort of a weakness.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
On Henry's side, and this, you know, seeing a weakness in the king was just not allowed, especially where the French were concerned as well. There's no doubt the French had people watching as well, you know. And so I'm not justifying what he did, you know. I mean, they were together for a long time. She did get the sharp end of the stick.
Yeah.
For want of a better word. But I think that would have been going through his mind as well. Her age and the chances of having a male heir after 40 years of age.
And that's where the problems began then, wasn't it, really? And the sad thing is, obviously, she was a devout Catholic. He was a devout Catholic. You know, it was such a strong religion for both of them. And then it all went terribly pear-shaped when Anne Boleyn was on the scene. She was a lady in waiting, wasn't she, for Katherine? So she was already in the court. She had already caught many men's eye, including Henry VIII. So that was the start of the downfall of Katherine, that somebody else had caught his eye, that was younger, potentially could produce an heir. But he wasn't really thinking about that to begin with, because he wanted her to be his mistress. If you remember, we mentioned this previously, didn't we? And she was adamant that she wasn't going to be his mistress. You know, she wanted to marry him. So this really did start the ball rolling with the great breakdown of the marriage of Katherine and Henry, and also the start, as we know, as we mentioned previously, about the Reformation as well.
Because I mean, and she arrived at Henry's court in 1522, and so Henry had already been with Anne's younger sister. You know, says it was, so one thing that pops into my head is, you know, you've got Katherine there. Henry's already had, was it Margaret and Mary Boleyn? I probably got that name wrong, but Katherine would have been aware of Henry's having Anne's younger sister as a mistress, and all of a sudden, the other sister appears at Henry's court.
Yeah.
You can imagine maybe what was going through Katherine's mind when she saw the other sister.
Yeah.
And became hurling. I think Katherine was kind of hostile towards Anne at first.
Yeah.
You know, which you can't really blame her.
No, absolutely. This very young, very flirty thing with heaving breasts comes on the scene, doesn't she? Catching everybody's eye. So, yeah, it must have been incredibly difficult for her. And as we know, Katherine didn't want to get divorced. She didn't want to break with, she didn't want to break with the Catholic Church because she was a devout Catholic. But everything that happened, as we know, because it's one of the most famous things in history. This other woman that came into his life led the breakup of one of the most strong marriages. It was quite devastating for their subjects as well, for the public that absolutely loved Henry and Catherine as a couple. You know, they had a huge sort of following. They were very, very popular, and it was all going quite swimmingly, really, while he was still with her. And the minute that they separated and went their own way, it all went a bit pear-shaped, didn't it? It was really, really difficult.
I think, you know, how do you put it? I think when, you know, when it started to go pear-shaped, Henry just, I mean, he loved Catherine.
Yeah.
You know, for all the years,
absolutely.
you know, how he felt after it went pear-shaped is anybody's guess, really. But I think he kind of sidetracked after Anne Boleyn arrived at court.
Yeah.
I mean, there are stories. I mean, Anne, she was born in, it's kind of between 1500 and 1507. She was born. I can't find an actual date.
Yeah, that's right. They're not quite sure, interestingly, are they? So,
which I found quite strange. You know, everybody else has got a date, or maybe a date within a month or two. But you know, it's with 7 years.
Yeah, it's
they
quite
don't
bizarre,
know
really.
So you don't exactly know what age she was when, you know, which will come to obviously when she died. You know, some people say she was 30, some people say she was 34, and etc., etc. But you don't exactly know, because you don't know when she was born.
No, I know. It's really, that is really strange, isn't it?
You can only take a guess, and obviously she was the daughter of George and Elizabeth Boleyn. And people have said that George Boleyn was very politically motivated. He used his daughters, whether this is true or not, we don't know. He encouraged his younger daughter, I'll say Mary, I'll probably get the name wrong, into the king's bed, because he wanted to climb the social ladder, basically.
Yeah.
You know, and then when Henry tired of her, he kind of shoved Anne towards, right, it's your turn.
Yeah.
Go and see where you can get me. You know, and all the while, you see, they were both very, very strong Catholics, especially Catherine.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So divorce wasn't an option, so you just wonder what was going through her mind. You know, she's in this marriage. She's been with that man for 20 plus years. She's totally in love with him. He doesn't want her anymore. She doesn't believe in divorce.
No. And she had the allies of Cardinal Wolsey and the Pope, who obviously, Pope, the head of the Catholic Church. Cardinal Wolsey, as we know, was a great ally of Catherine's. So nobody would accept the fact that, you know, they were going to divorce or he could leave the church, which is why he took the law into his own hands, didn't he, and declared himself the head of the church, the new church, which was the Church of England.
You just had a wee white thing go across your screen.
I know. I do get bizarre orbs quite often when I sit before I do my circle on a Wednesday evening. I get flashing lights and little orbs every now and again pop by.
I noticed that on the last show that you had quite a few going by. I thought it was bugs, but then I thought, well, it's kind of too early in the year for bugs, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's not bugs. I get a variety of things. I get flashing lights. Sometimes I get orbs. Sometimes people say it looks like feathers floating down. I mean, it's quite lovely, really. But
the white feathers, we were talking about that last night in the show. I know it's totally off the subject, but I find them strange. I was in the town, it was last year, and I was standing, it's a bit of pedestrian precinct in the town, and it wasn't a windy day or anything, you know, it was quite a nice day for Scotland, and this lone white feather just floated down. I've got a photo of my phone.
I love that.
This one white feather.
I love that when you see them float down in front of you. That's really special. It's really lovely, isn't it?
I couldn't work out where I was looking for a dead seagull or something, you know. But just I watched this thing float to the ground and it just landed between my feet. And then it happened out in the garden, in the front garden. I was out there one day and this one white feather just floated down. And I put a comment on the page about that one outside, and the guy said, probably a bird. So, well, where's the rest of the word?
I know, love it.
It might not have been spirit or whatever, but it was just really, really weird how that especially in the town, it just landed between my feet.
Yeah, and that's a really nice spiritual sign. Definitely to get a white feather. And the little tiny white fluffy ones just seem to appear in random places.
I'm sure I've still got the photo. I'll send it to you. I'm sure I've still got it on my phone. It was just really, really bizarre. But anyway, back to what we were talking about.
The beautiful Katherine. So and therefore the Reformation began, and she was exiled. We'll go to she was exiled in 1531. She was separated from her daughter Mary. She was never to see Mary again. So this was incredibly sad. She was sent from house to house, and these were quite bleak. The houses that she was sent to were quite bleak, quite sparse. She was gradually separated from her servants. She was gradually separated from her friends. I mean, Henry was being so cruel to her. And she did not deserve it, but she was just kind of really shoved in the background and was deliberately kept moving around. And it basically broke her. I mean, a lot of people said that allegedly she died of cancer, but a lot of people truly believe that she died of a broken heart because of the way she was treated. She could not believe that her beloved husband had done this to her. And she was pleading with him. She used to write letters to him. She always signed, your loving queen. And it was just awful to think that he could just cast her aside like that. It was so terribly sad. She actually died on the 7th of January in 1536, and she was aged 50, which back then, as we said before, was quite a good age. And she was in Kimbolton Castle at that time when she died. And again, she never saw Mary again. As I say, she didn't have friends. She didn't have servants. She was basically left just to rot. And it's just so sad when you think of the big part she had to play in Henry's life and how long she was in Henry's life for. It's just so sad, isn't it, to think that's
I think the saddest, another sad part of it is you say, she was sent from house to house. She was stripped of titles and the rest of it taken away for her daughter. You say she wrote numerous letters to Henry, and
I know.
But I mean, in this day and age, the old divorce sign, you entitled to 50% of each other's whatever. Back then there was nothing she could do because it was the king's will, and it didn't matter who you were in society, no matter how many people you had on your side.
Yeah.
If the king decreed it, then that's what happened.
Yeah. And he made a lot of enemies as well, didn't he? When he obviously, got rid of Katherine because she was such a popular queen, he became a lot less popular himself, and that's when, like I said, it all turned a little bit nasty, really, didn't it? And
it started to turn then. You saw another side to Henry. I know people blame the jousting accident that he had as well, with head injury on the way team. But I think the change started before then.
Yeah.
I think so. Maybe it was a case of this is awfully sad and he grace her to an extent. It is.
Absolutely.
And so I think the change started to come then, and maybe Henry sat down to, I've spent 20 years with this woman. Enough's enough. That's not what I want. I want to do this, and I'm going to do it because I'm the king and I can do anything I want, basically.
And he still had a chance to produce an heir with a younger woman, didn't he? Hence, Anne Boleyn being on the scene. And as you say, Anne Boleyn, Thomas Boleyn was a nobleman. He was her father. He was very ambitious. He was also the Earl of Wiltshire. Elizabeth Howard, her mother, was the daughter of the second Duke of Norfolk. They were a very powerful family. So Anne Boleyn, did come from a very powerful family. And like you said, they were very ambitious. And as we say, there is no exact date as to when she was born, which is really quite bizarre, isn't it? Because
I've looked. I mean, we've covered the Tudors, quite a few times in the past, what have you. And we all the other wives, Henry, Arthur, everybody else, there's some kind of date of birth, but It's the 7. She was born somewhere between these 7 years.
Yeah, which is bizarre. Apparently, she was born in Blickling Hall in Norfolk, but as we know, she spent a lot of her childhood in Hever Castle. This is where they sort of grew up. So she had her. I think Mary was her older sister, and George was her younger brother. They did have other siblings, didn't they? But they obviously passed either in, they were early childhood or infancy, because a lot of diseases and things took them away in the Tudor times, didn't they? But the 3 children that survived were Mary, Anne, and George. I haven't got my glasses on, so I can't read what those are.
Laura's saying that's awful. Mary's vows should be sacred, especially if married in church. No one is exempt from.
Really sad, Laura. That's so true, isn't it?
Sorry about that. No one is exempt from that, royalty or not.
No. So
that's really fit there.
Bless your heart. Yeah, so you've had this lurgy you're still trying to get over, haven't you?
I was getting over with Barry Frankie's on last night, and he's convinced he's got the Black Plague.
Poor Barry. He's passed it to you.
Well, I was speaking to him earlier on, and I said to him, before you go, send me your bank account details and your PIN number, because you're not going to need it where you're going. So I'm waiting that coming. But he seems to be doing, but I was doing, Laura was doing it as well last week, the week before, but it's just I started to get this stupid cough. It's not constant, it just pops up every now and again.
So many things around, it's just so annoying at this time of year, isn't it?
I can't wait for the summer to come and get the vest top and that on and get outside and
get your shorts on. Do you know what? We've had a lovely sunny day here in Oxfordshire today. It's felt like spring. It's been so beautiful, and it's just like, oh, come on, spring. It's been such a long winter. It's been so cold and wet and dark and horrible. But today, a bit of sunshine was just so lovely.
I think your winter started in July last year or something. I'm not too sure. July, August. I mean, yesterday was really nice. Laura cares. And then I think it was around about 4 o'clock-ish, I heard this noise and I looked at it, and it was big, thick hailstones.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
Well, 10 minutes before, it was like sunny and bright, and then just heard it. I thought it was one of the cats running about, and I looked outside, and I said, the hailstones. And they were boom, 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 boom. So
we must be British, because we're talking about the weather.
He does not. He has a lurgy. See, lurgy is seemingly a word up here that's just when you're generally no well or something.
Yeah, we use the lurgy. Somebody's got the lurgy.
Well, you use that word as well.
Yeah, we use that.
I'd never heard it until. I was from Glasgow. I moved down here 10 years ago. I moved down here. I was saying the other day, it's 10-year anniversary of being Kilmarnock, but I'd never heard it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, we use that.
You're no well, basically. But we're getting off track again. Yeah.
We're getting off track. So we're talking about the wonderful Anne Boleyn, who's probably one of the queens that stands out the most from Henry VIII, the second wife of Henry VIII. So we're talking about siblings. She had an older sister, Mary, who Henry also had an affair with, as we mentioned earlier. She had a younger brother, George, who later was to become the Earl of Rochford. So he played a very important part. They had a really privileged childhood. They were brought up with beautiful surroundings. They went to lovely parties. Politics and religion were quite important in their life as well. In 1530, Anne, still at a very young age, went to the Netherlands allegedly and was a lady in waiting for Margaret of Austria. So again, she learnt then to become a very well-rounded lady. She learnt very many languages, to play music, to write poetry. She was a really skillful lady, and she learnt all of these wonderful skills in that court. She then went to France, and she was a lady in waiting to Queen Claude. And again, it was a very sophisticated time, era, place to be. So she was a very well-rounded, she was a very beautiful lady anyway. She was very different to Katherine. If anything, she was darker. You'd think it would be the other way around, but she had the dark hair, the sultry look, very petite, very charming, very witty, very full of character, and she kind of mesmerized anybody that was around her because she was just so intelligent and just a really well-rounded person. And she learned all of these skills and all of the tricks of the trades, if you like to say, in the Netherlands court, in the French court. And then of course she came to England, and she was a lady in waiting for Katherine of Aragon, which is when she caught the eye, as we said, of Henry VIII. She was originally actually betrothed to Henry Percy in 1522, but that was broken off for several reasons. And again, I think talking about the ambitious family wanting to push her in front of Henry and to get her into Henry's court. So when she came back to England, that potential marriage to Henry Percy was broken off so that she could then play in the court, basically, which is exactly what she did, isn't it, really? But yeah, she was very striking. She was very unconventional, dark hair, dark eyes. Very slim, very elegant. As I say, she was quite captivating. I think everybody seemed to have a very soft spot for Anne because there weren't many people, apart from other women who may have felt threatened by her. She was never painted during her lifetime, interestingly. We were talking about portraits earlier. She was painted, a portrait of her was painted, well, several portraits of her were painted, but they always depict an older, more sullen Anne. She's always got a dark hood on. She's got the famous bee with the drop pearls, that necklace that she always wore. She was never portrayed as a young, vivacious girl that she was known as, because she was painted after her lifetime as this solemn person, because we know the sadness that happened, we'll come to that in a bit, but she obviously lost her head as well when she fell out of favour with Henry and many other people. But she was quite a captivating person, very intelligent, again, very knowledgeable, very interested in politics. So she also used to have a large input with what Henry was talking about, what his Privy Council were talking about. And I think they started to sort of get a little bit worried about how much influence she had on Henry. Did something else just go past then? I just saw another flash of light of something.
I went from your left to your right.
Yeah, I think I was aware of something. And she obviously influenced, her achievements in life was she influenced the huge breakup of Henry's marriage and the breakup of the Catholic Church, so the Reformation that started in 1530. So her and Henry secretly married. They were said to secretly married in 1533, and then she was crowned queen. And of course, this became very, very unpopular with the public, with their subjects, because they still held Katherine in great esteem, and it hadn't been made public that she'd been kind of sent away. But again, like Katherine, Anne had very many miscarriages. She also had a stillborn son. But then in 1533, she gave birth to Elizabeth I, one of the longest reigning monarchs that we know. So both of his strong wives, Katherine and Anne, gave birth to two very strong women who were to be queens, which, ironically, he was trying to get a male heir, and he had two female heirs that came on to be very, very strong queens, didn't they? So that's really quite interesting as well.
Yeah, another light behind you.
Oh, wow. Gosh, okay. Tonight.
You seem to be quite popular tonight with your wee lights flowing about.
Yeah, I think they're definitely around because, as I say, they were playing with I thought we weren't going to connect tonight because we connected once, didn't we? And then we had to come off, and then I couldn't connect. So I think they're spooks in the system tonight, definitely. So they're letting us know that they are around.
I'm not having any issues with this. I said, thank the Lord, this the other night was unbelievable. But so you've got Anne Boleyn, you got Katherine, she's there, but she's been kind of ostracised.
Yeah.
You've got this young Anne Boleyn. Excuse me, see this cough?
Bless you.
I blame Larry Frankish, I really do.
Yeah, we blame him. It's his fault.
I'll mail him later on, pull him up. And so Henry was probably of the thinking, well, this is your second Boleyn sister, I'll get her, no problem.
Yeah.
But that wasn't to be the case. Anne played hard to get. She was
really did. Yeah.
Very, very strong-willed. And as we've said before in other shows, she basically told Henry, if you want me in your bed, then make me queen.
Yeah, absolutely. She was very, very very pushy, and she knew what she wanted, didn't she? And she absolutely refused him. And I think this made her even more irresistible to him, because it gave him a bit of a chase, didn't it? It wasn't going to be straightforward. He couldn't just bed her and have his way with her. She was going to play hard to get and really make him work for her. So
well, this is it. So
Yeah.
this is what I was going to say. She was probably the first one. I mean, we've all seen films, you know, and we've all seen the Tudors, but all these women, you just snap his fingers and, you know, they were there. But I think Anne gave him a fright. Anne was the first woman that stood up to him.
Yeah.
I dare say him and Katherine had their arguments throughout the years, and you know, but this was a totally different thing. This was somebody fresh, somebody new, and he was probably thinking, you know, I'll get her no problem. But oh, wait a minute, she stood up to me. Nobody ever told the king no.
No, and she was very fiery. She was said to be very as well, wasn't she? So I think, you know, they probably had some really heated discussions and arguments, I should imagine. I should imagine it was quite a fiery, passionate relationship to start with. And let's face it, they were only together for 3 years.
Yeah,
so it was quite but they, again, I want to say they were very much in love. They really truly loved each other, because if you go to Hever Castle, there are so many love letters written to each other that Henry had written to her, that she had written, and absolutely full of, you know, really heart-wrenching love for one another. So again, it's so sad that they were only together for 3 years, and then, you know, she fell from grace, basically. As we know, she was accused of adultery, accused of treason, accused of incest with her brother. So many, as we know, of the courtiers were taken down with her because they were made scapegoats, basically, because again, Henry wanted a way out. He realized that she was causing trouble. He wasn't so popular whilst he was with her, so she was kind of falling from grace a little bit. Thomas Cromwell, as we know, had worked his way up into the Privy Council. Cardinal Wolsey had long gone. Thomas Cromwell started off backing Anne, but then when he realised how powerful she was and how much Henry started to listen to her, he started to get very nervous, and he started to look at how people were reacting to her. So he was a big part in her downfall, as we know. So it was a you know, it was a real kind of an awful situation that she was having all these accusations thrown at her, along with many other people who had been close to the king. And really, they were all quite innocent. She was very flirty. She was very playful, but it was quite innocent with the people that she was, you know, having dalliances with.
It was very as well. It just seemed to all explode. You know, I mean, she had that miscarriage, you know, and she gave birth to a stillborn boy as well. But in the background, you had this Privy Council, and they were all fighting for scraps at the king's table, basically. You know, as you say, Wolsey was gone, but prior to Wolsey's death, Wolsey was the most powerful man apart from the king in Great Britain. And the Privy Council hated him. Because, as we said before, he was a butcher's son. He was not, they considered him, he wasn't worthy of, you know, having the right ear of the king, sort of thing. And then, you know, Wolsey, he's out of the picture. You Cromwell, he's now there, but he's making his way slowly, steadily up. See, I do apologise for this coughing.
You can't help it.
But then there's this Anne's there, and one, Wolsey's scared of losing his power, and two, he's scared of losing his power to a woman. Tracey, back then, women in Henry's court were just seen basically as cattle, basically. It was the men that were. Women are there for, you know, to show, you know, for the men to show off or for them to bed, you know, whatever. That was their sole purpose in the court. And so for Cromwell to be sitting there thinking, you know, Henry's listening to her more than me and she's a woman, this was unheard of. You
and
know.
they also Anne and they had a big falling out, didn't they? Because Thomas Cromwell wanted to sell all of the treasures of the, obviously when it was the dissolution of the monasteries, he wanted to sell all of the treasures. He wanted to destroy some of the monasteries as well. And Anne really fought. She wanted to really help the poor, really help the needy, do more of a charitable thing. So they had a huge falling out about this. They didn't agree with how things were dealt with. And I think he realised how powerful that she was. And that was the start of the downfall for her, with Thomas Cromwell kind of, you know, putting in the snidey remarks to Henry VIII whenever he could, really, to try and, you know, blacken
Plant
her
the seed.
name. Yeah,
They
to plant
just
the seeds, blacken her
plant the
name.
seed.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, then the accusations came. But just prior to that, Anne kind of nailed her own coffin shut when she said to Henry Norris, "You look for dead man's shoes," which was heard in public, and that was seen as treason, basically. And I think that's what tipped. I think that's what gave Cromwell the edge.
Yeah.
You know, he finally had something concrete. And then, of course, let's not forget you had Lady Rochford.
Yeah, exactly. She was putting a nail in the coffin because, again, I don't think, as I said, Anne was very popular with the men for obvious reasons, but women probably hated her because she was so confident, so vivacious, so flirty. I'm sure women felt quite intimidated by her. So they probably would have done anything to put the boot in as well, which is obviously what Lady Rochford did.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and, of course, Lady Rochford was married to George Boleyn.
Yeah.
And I think she saw this as a chance to get rid of both Anne, and we don't know how their marriage was. It is portrayed that it wasn't the best, you know, George and Lady Rochford. So I think she saw this as a chance to get rid of him.
Yeah.
As well. Obviously, Lady Rochford went on to be one of Catherine Howard's ladies in waiting, which we're going to, you know, in future shows. And she ended up in the scaffold along with, but that's for another show. So you get Lady Rochford, who's in the background, and she's adding to the pot as well. And then Anne is arrested, which in my mind, it was just a massive big setup.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
it really was. It was shocking, really, because she was quite naive and quite innocent. You know, one minute she was in the favour of Henry and, you know, really enjoying her popularity, and then the next thing, everybody and everything was turning against her and poisoning her own husband against her. So it must have been quite frightening for her, actually, quite awful.
And her father at the time distanced himself from her as well. Because he was arrested on different charges, but he was later released. But you had the brother who was arrested, and I don't know if her mother was still alive at this point. I don't think she was, because there's not much mention here.
Okay.
Elizabeth. So basically, you've got Anne sitting there, and her family's turned out what family she'd left. One of them was in prison, and the other one's just totally abandoned her. You've got the Privy Council that's against her. You've got Cromwell that's against her. And so her only true ally would be the king himself, but no, he's getting fed these snippets of...
Exactly. He was poisoned against her, wasn't he, sadly? So...
he's getting fed these snippets of information, and he did tell Cromwell, investigate it and let me know what happened. I think Cromwell tortured most of it. I think there was 5 or 6 of them are co-accused. We know that Smeaton was tortured to a confession.
I know, it was terrible. I mean, man's inhumanity to man all those years ago and still going on now, isn't it, when you think about it? But it was shocking what they did. You know, absolutely shocking. And if you were executed in a certain way, it was seen to be a privilege, because it could have been so much more painful, couldn't it? For instance, you know, obviously he chose to have Anne executed by sword rather than the axe, because it was supposed to be, you know, more humane and better for her. So, I mean, it was just shocking back in that time what they did to each other. It really was. And the torture and things that they did, the implements they used, really quite horrendous. So, yeah, so the fall of Anne. So she was accused of all of these things, and all of her courtiers were accused of all of these things. And the marriage had lasted 3 years and 4 months, basically. And it was only annulled 2 days before she was executed. And as we know, she was taken to the Tower of London. She was held there for only 17 days. People always picture that to be quite grim. But the Tower of London at the time, it wasn't necessarily, you know, she was in the Queen's quarters, so they were quite nice, they were quite plush. So there's a good part of Anne that thought probably, you know, she's not going to die, she's not going to be executed. She will, the king will, you know, King Henry will come to his senses and she will be freed. You know, that thought process, that whole thought process must have been. She was held there for 17 days. And then sadly, on the 19th of May, 1536, as we know, a skilled swordsman from France was brought over and she was sadly executed. But I have her final words here. Would you like me to read them out? Because it's interesting what she said. So I have them in front of me here. And basically, these were the words that she addressed before she was going to have her head chopped off. And the people were stood there watching. These were her words that she said. And she said, I come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak of what whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there ever. And to me he was ever good, a gentle and sovereign lord. So those were her final words, moments before the executioner did his deed. And basically she defended Prince Henry. King Henry. She talked about him in a loving way, because if you mentioned not long ago, Scott, her family was still alive. She wanted to save them. She wanted to protect them. Mary was still alive. Her father was still alive. We don't know. We're not sure about her mother, whether her mother was or not. But she wasn't going to go down saying what a terrible king he was, because that could have had huge implications for the people that were left, that were his supporters.
That's the thing. I mean, the whole, just jump back to the trial, the whole trial was just for show, you know, because they had worked out, well, later on, way down the line, they had worked out about the travelling distance for Dover to Cali to London, and it turned out that the swordsman would have to have been ordered before Anne's actual trial.
I know.
For him to get there. And time. Yeah. So even before she stood trial, she was already convicted and condemned. You know, and then you've got Cromwell in the background who's driving this machine, for want of a better word. You know, you can see the end is nigh for Anne. It's all coming together for him. He's going to be rid of her. He's going to be rid of George Boleyn. And I mean, the other co-accused, you know, some of them denied it, some of them just admitted it through torture, basically, as you say, it was really, really cruel. Yeah. They had already been executed.
Yeah.
I think they were executed 2 days before Anne was. I think Anne was always the frame of mind, especially at the end, that she wasn't going to get executed.
Yeah.
Because
they say, don't they, that even when she was stood with the swordsman, she was looking around waiting for somebody to come and say, you know, no, stop, this isn't going to happen. She truly believed that he would save her, you know, Henry would come and save her. So terribly sad. You can't even begin to imagine, can you, what's going through somebody's mind, you know, when they think, no, surely I'm not going to be killed. There's going to be somebody that's going to save me at the 11th hour. And then to know when you're putting your head down that this is the end. I mean, it's
especially when you know that you've not done anything.
Yeah, exactly. She was innocent. All of those that were executed before her were innocent. They were just used as scapegoats, and it was all you know, political play, backstabbing, all lies, all propaganda. I mean, it was quite shocking, really. It really was.
And let's not forget, you know, we'll cover in the next show, obviously, but by this time, Henry's already courting Jane Seymour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She's arrived on the scene, you know, this is going on in the background. So, I mean, that was what before Katherine Aragon died, he was courting Anne Boleyn. And then when Katherine of Aragon died, it said that they had big celebrations and that Henry wore yellow the following day, the full day. which was seen in England as a sign of celebration, but in Spain it was a sign of mourning.
In some of the films that have been portrayed, they portray Anna's wearing yellow as well when she heard that Catherine had died, as a celebration.
So when you think of that move, it's quite clever for them to wear yellow, because obviously in England it's seen as celebration. And if any of the Spanish pulled them up and said, no, well, this is Spanish for mourning.
Yeah.
So their backsides were covered both sides, basically.
Yeah.
You know, with Catherine. And I mean, even Anne's execution was it was postponed twice, but then after she'd been beheaded, her body lay in the scaffold till the afternoon.
Exactly. There were no preparations made for her at all, which is so sad. And she was also buried, as we know, at the Tower of London, and it was an unmarked grave for many years. And during renovations, apparently in the 19th century, they believe that they identified her remains, and there is now a plaque that, you know, obviously remembers it. But for many years, she was buried in an unmarked grave, totally forgotten about. Every sign of Anne Boleyn was taken down. Every sort of symbol that her and Henry had together that had been carved in anything, it was all scratched out, taken down, covered up. It was like she didn't exist. And that is so sad, isn't it? And yet
it's sad.
She's one of the queens we talk about the most. She had such an impact so many centuries later that we still talk about her, and yet they were trying to eradicate her, trying to, you know, make out that she didn't exist, that everybody forgot her name. But actually now she's the most talked about, isn't she?
Jesus, do you think maybe that everything was rubbed out, you know, because maybe Henry, in a way, I mean, Henry realised after it that she had been innocent all along, you know, but by that time it was too late, obviously.
Well, that's it. A more recent document, I don't know how recent, but they say that they now believe that Henry showed great remorse and great sorrow after Anne died, but that only came to light quite a long time afterwards, didn't it? Because obviously James Seymour was on the scene, who he did truly love. We'll go on to that another time. But yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? That he kind of wanted to get rid of her. This was the way to get rid of her. Pay for a swordsman, job done. But actually, apparently, it did deeply affect him, and he did bitterly regret it. And he probably started to see the true colours of his Privy Council, you know. And as you said previously, they had not managed him well, and he said that, didn't he, to them? He addressed them.
I've not been handled well. I've not been managed well. But I mean, obviously, Henry wanted rid of Anne. Maybe execution wasn't in his mind, but then I think it was more or less just dropped into his lap by Cromwell. But Henry never at first intended to have her executed. You know, because by this time he was obviously head of the Church of England. So divorce would have been an option, you know, an easier option. But then Cromwell comes along with this, you know, other option. There you go. And Henry's maybe thought to himself, right, well, I'll just go with that option. If that makes sense. You know, I'll let them take care of it. You know, you go and investigate it. Because Henry wasn't at the trial. Henry, he stayed away for the whole thing. For when she was arrested, he took nothing to do with it.
When you think about it, Henry was totally manipulated, wasn't he, by his Privy Council?
It was.
He was totally manipulated, because you've just summed it up. They did everything for him. He didn't get involved, but they were just feeding him false information all the time about, you know, how to deal with things, how to get rid of his wives. And he only kept, obviously, Catherine of Aragon because he knows that it would have caused terrible war between Spain and England had he had Catherine of Aragon killed, which is why he sent her into exile. The same as the one that he called the Mayor of Flanders from Germany. He spared her life because he didn't want to get bad relationships with Germany. But obviously, it was different with Anne, wasn't it? So
I mean, just quickly, we were talking about portraits earlier on. That's a prime example. Anne of Cleves, you know, she's portrayed as this great beauty and stuff like that. And when Henry met her in person, he says she looks like a mare, or she's a mare. Whatever the word was, you know, she looks like a horse. So that goes to show you about the accuracy of how portraits were painted. But and he was married 6 times, and each wife, had their own story. And but Anne Boleyn, as you just said a few minutes ago, she's still talked about to this day. His other wives suddenly forgotten. I know Katherine of Aragon, the anniversary of her birth and her death are still celebrated. But Anne Boleyn just seemed to be the most, I don't want to say most famous, but in a way she is.
I think she's the one that stands out, isn't she?
I hate to use the word famous because it's kind of disrespectful to the other ones, but she's the one that really, really sticks out. And I think it's the whole, know how they met. I think it's the other end of the stick, how she met her end.
Yeah.
That has captured people. I mean, we'll come Catherine Howard. She was executed as well, but that's another day. But with Anne Boleyn being totally innocent and then being executed, and as it says, Henry totally distanced himself from her. There was no funeral arrangements made. They hadn't even provided a coffin.
I know. It was shocking. Shocking how she was.
Our ladies in waiting had to search about, and she ended up inside an old arrow chest.
Yeah, I know. And this is what's so sad when you look at their marriage of 3 years and how much they truly seem to love each other. Like I said before, the love letters they wrote to each other, that a lot of them are displayed at Hever Castle now. It's so sad to think they had that love for one another, and then it ended how it did. It's a real another tragic love story, isn't it? Just like it was with Catherine of Aragon when she basically had a broken heart.
I mean, with Catherine of Aragon, she was exiled, but she was still there in the background. So she faded away.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, actually. She was fading
She kind of faded into the background further and further as time went on. But with Anne, it was just, pardon the pun, chop. And that was it. Whereas I think, do you think if Henry had divorced her, she would still be as talked about as she is today?
Yeah, probably not. Probably not, because the fact that he had her executed, it makes it even more tragic, doesn't it? So therefore, I think you remember the tragedy more. Whereas if she was just divorced, she would have just been another one of the wives in a way, wouldn't she?
Aye, so I think it's her whole end that people can remember the most. And she was, don't forget, she was one of the very few people that was executed within the walls of the tower. Which was reserved for royalty or, high-standing nobles and that. Everybody else went to Tower Hill. It was just up the road to the Tower of London. But she was executed actually inside the walls of the tower. And at first they weren't sure if she was going to be burned or beheaded, but Henry decided on beheading. But some people say, you see, this sometimes I get mixed up with this. There's stories that say that Anne requested the swordsman of Calais because he was well known, and he was well known to be very skillful in what he did.
Okay.
So there are reports that say Anne requested the swordsman of Calais to come, which
that's interesting. I've not heard that before.
Doesn't make sense. As I say earlier on about the time thing between the conviction and the execution. Well, if she did request them, did she request them before she went to trial because she knew what the outcome was going to be?
It's an interesting theory, isn't it? We'll never truly know, will we?
We'll never know. You see, there's all different kind of conflicting reports. Again, same as their date of birth. I don't think we'll ever find out. But so it seemed like the swordsman didn't want the job. He was totally against executing this lady, this queen, and he asked. I think it was something they asked for Anne's forgiveness on the scaffold before we couldn't ask for it after. That's a bit. He couldn't ask for it after it. forget I said that. It's been a long day. He really didn't want to carry out this execution.
No, I know. I mean,
You
it's
know?
just horrible all round. Imagine having that as a job, and to having to to have the responsibility of having to execute a Queen of England.
I mean, I suppose job-wise, if you knew the person on the scaffold, was like a serial killer or something like that, really, really deserved to, what was coming to them, then fair enough.
That's a different
You wouldn't have a problem with taking his head off. But as you say, to execute a woman, I mean, look at Anne Askew as well. She was accused of treason. She was taught when you were saying about torture. She was tortured she couldn't walk. She was sentenced. She was burned. But she couldn't walk to the stake. She had to be carried. And that was a woman because she'd been racked that much.
That's it. All of her tendons and ligaments had just snapped, hadn't they?
They were just her body was just ripped apart basically, and they had to carry her.
Yeah.
And there is the famous scene that one of her ladies, one of her friends paid the executioner to put gunpowder around her neck. To hasten her end. But whether that's true or not, we don't know. But just Anne Boleyn, I find her the most fascinating. No disrespect to the rest of them. She's just the most fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating. But going back to Katherine of Aragon, she was such a powerful, strong queen for Henry VIII for so many years. Anne Boleyn we'll always remember for the reasons we've talked about, but actually they were only married for 3 years. So it's interesting if you look at the comparisons. Katherine was on the scene for so much longer. Anne was only on the scene for 3 years, but she is the one that stands out. So it's
it. I mean, I think
it's interesting.
Like 24 years or something.
24 years. Yeah, Katherine of Aragon. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you've got this woman who came from nowhere, basically. I mean, we all know Katherine. She was a Spanish princess. Well, she came from a very, very high up family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
On both parents' side. Anne kind of came out of nowhere. All right, her family weren't too bad off, but.
Yeah, they were quite a powerful family in their own right, to be fair, where Anne Boleyn came from. And like you say, very ambitious. They kind of made sure that both Mary and Anne got the king's attention, which they did because, he had both of them at some stage, didn't he? So, they were quite an ambitious family. But sadly, look what happened. They lost George, their son, and they lost Anne. Mary was the only one that survived, wasn't she, for a while? So, it's the whole era is fascinating, but it's one great big tragedy as well, isn't it? When you think about it, it really is.
It is. I've been fascinated by the Tudors for years. I say we've covered it many times, but it's something that there's so many branches to its tree. Basically,
you can never get bored of talking about the Tudors because it's fascinating, isn't it?
Obviously, we're doing covering the wives, and then after that, we're going to go into the people in the background, like Thomas More, who's a story unto himself. Wolsey,
they've all got their own backstory. They're all fascinating characters, aren't they? They really are. So you could just talk about it forevermore if you cover.
You could. You get Cromwell, you've got More, you've got Wolsey, you've got Charles Brandon. And that's only 4 of them, and they were all fighting for the attention of the king, and I don't think Henry really cared. They were all fighting for the attention of this one guy, and I don't think Henry really, I know what I mean up here, really bothered too much. Maybe I think it was maybe a case of Henry thinking, right, let them squabble, because I just cannot be annoyed with it. I'm going to do.
He probably couldn't trust any of them either, could he? In the end, he realised that he'd just been made a fool of, basically, hadn't he? So yeah.
Especially after Anne's death, and then when see, I think he knew all along Anne was innocent. This is why he distanced himself from the arrest to the, onwards. Basically, I think he knew I mean, he did call her all sorts of names under the sun, because I think Cromwell did a really good job of convincing him, you know, that she was guilty. But I think the back of his mind, there was always that doubt, you know, what she's no guilty. And this is one of the reasons he distanced himself for the entire time. And then, you know, after her death, obviously, the penny started to drop, and he realised, you know, she was truly innocent. And then he's a king. He just moved on.
Yeah, he'd already, as you say, he'd already got the next one lined up, even when Anne was still around. So that's just
he was already courting Jane Seymour.
And she was the opposite to Anne. Anne was the powerful, flirty, feisty one, whereas Jane was very quiet, very serene, very demure. So he'd gone from the opposite to Anne's personality. He was very drawn to Jane. So, but we, you know, as we say, we can talk about her another time. But yeah, he went from one extreme to the other, basically.
Yeah, but it just, I don't know, you know, no disrespect to all the other monarchs. I think he's one of the most famous ones in history. Yeah, and I think he's famous for, you know, breaking away from the Catholic Church.
Yeah, absolutely. The Reformation.
His 6 wives.
Yeah.
You know, and the amount of people, I mean, it's estimated about 72,000 people that he executed.
I know, it's shocking, isn't it?
You can't even call it. I mean, he reigned for 30-something years.
And he also he also was responsible for passing a law for people to be boiled alive. You know,
for poisoners.
We're talking about torture and all sorts of things. He passed a law for people to be boiled. So there were so many different ways to kill people and execute people, and they were all pretty horrific.
I think if I had the choice, beheading would have been my choice.
But as we said before, you don't necessarily die straight away, do you? It's a matter of seconds. You know, you still have several seconds before you actually pass, once your head is separated from your body. They didn't think that at the time, but we now know later on, don't we, that is not the case.
Well, it was said that after Anne's beheading, see, there's 2 conflicting stories as well. One says the executioner held her head up after it. But most of the stories disagree with that. But people did report back then that you know, after she was beheaded, they saw her lips were still moving and her eyes were moving.
Yeah,
which we now know is medically possible. You know, because there's still oxygen and blood and, you know, whatever's going on up there.
Oh, terrible! Oh,
before you pass it,
does it?
But no, he did pass the law about being boiled, and he also passed the law. Let's not forget, which we'll cover in another show. This is where Lady Rochford came in, because she went insane when she was being held in the Tower, and the law then stated that an insane person could not be executed. But Henry then passed a law saying that insane people can be executed for treason.
Okay.
So that was another law they brought in.
Right. Okay. Well, I've learned something new tonight then, because I didn't know that. So
because
he passed a law that if somebody was insane, they could then be executed.
If it was for treason, which she was accused of, because she helped Catherine Howard and her stuff.
Yeah.
But so he passed that law as well. He wanted rid of her.
Yeah.
And he says, you know, we're passing a law saying if it's treason, they can be executed. Which, you know, we know how, which we will cover in another show. But I think we'll wind it up there, Flower. Is there any more to add to Catherine or Anne?
No, I think they'll just always be etched in our mind, but they'll always be talked about as 2 very powerful queens of England. So we'll never forget them. They're the 2 fascinating ones. I'm not, you know, discrediting the other queens that we'll come on to talk about, but we'll have less to talk about them, to be honest, because Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn are the 2 top ones, really, aren't they?
They are the 2 top ones. You see, the other 4 will be shorter because, you know, no offence to them, they didn't have much as a big impact. Well, maybe Jane Seymour did with the love thing.
Yeah.
You know, which we will look at. But no, I think Catherine and Anne are the two most prominent.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the bundle. So I'll hold on to you after we come off, so don't disappear.
Yeah.
So where can people find you though?
So Facebook mainly, Tarot Tracey on Facebook. They'll find me in your friends list. So if they want to get hold of me for any reason, then they can. They'll find me that way.
And that's it. So go and give her a look up. So big thanks to Tracey. No, she's over there.
I never know. Oh no, I got it right the first time. Look, there you go.
You got it right first time. So we're going to wind it up there, folks. I hope you enjoyed a wee hour or so talking about Henry's first two wives. The next show we are going to cover more, because as you know, there's a lot more to this guy than meets the eye. Hey, that rhymes. More to the guy than meets the eye.
You're a poet and you didn't know it.
I know. Like, that's ancient, that one. That's as ancient as me. So, but I say, I'll keep a hold of you, dogs. So we're going to wind up there, folks. And we're back on tomorrow night with Sam Walks a Lot. I know that's not, but that's what our channel is. So this will be our first time meeting Sam, and it should be quite interesting. Not as interesting as this lady, mind you, because she doesn't talk a lot of popcorn. That doesn't rhyme, does it? Doesn't rhyme. Never mind. So we're here tonight, folks, and we'll see you again tomorrow night. But go and do Chase your wee look up, because she's well worth a watch.
Sleep.
All right, folks.
See you again.
Bye. Bye.